Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vernon Vincent, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for today's Reshape Life Sciences Fellows webinar. I've been in the medical device field for nearly 35 years, almost all of it working in the field of obesity surgery, from R&D on the lap band through the FDA clinical trials to development of the professional education program to support the safe and effective use of the lap band, which this program is part of. We're very pleased and grateful for you joining us today for the lap band in 2020. Everything you didn't know, we're afraid to ask. We're going to try and cover the high level main points today. You are so close to punching your ticket, so close to finishing. Each of you have been professional students essentially for your entire life to get to your day at the end of this month. And now one more thing. Our motivation for this event is ultimately to help lap band patients achieve the best possible results. To be clear, today is a very high level introduction, and we can't really hope to share with you everything you were afraid to ask, but we want you to know some core essentials, including what to do if you would like to know more. Next slide, please. This is the fourth in the series of webinars in this COVID season. Next slide, please. All prior events are available for viewing on the Reshape Life Sciences LinkedIn page, as this webinar will be as soon as it's completed. My personal goal and that of Reshape, and the true challenge today with such a high-level audience, is to make this time worth your time. With that in mind, let's get to it. Next slide, please. A few housekeeping details. All attendees are muted. We can't see you or hear you. Please send questions to us at any time during the presentation or at the end via the chat function on the right toolbar at the bottom. The last function button is the chat option. We'll do our best to answer these at the end of today's session. If we don't get to all of them, I promise I will email you back individual answers by early next week. Finally, there's a survey at the end of this webinar. We really appreciate your time. If you could give us your feedback, a few questions we've provided there. Next slide. Today's faculty includes representatives from the entire spectrum of bariatric surgery. And if my faculty will turn their cameras on and join me, we have major academic programs, NYU, to private practices, to university programs in the middle of the country. We truly have a slice of what bariatric surgery in the United States is today. Professor George Fielding comes to us from NYU Medical Center, transplanted from Brisbane, Australia. Dr. Fred Tasinga is the Director of Bariatric Surgery at Western Suburban Illinois Hospital. Dr. Tasinga is the President of the Illinois Association of Bariatric Surgeons. Dr. John Osofka is the Bariatric Director of the University of Louisville Mary Ann Elizabeth Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. Next slide, please. So gentlemen, I'll take it from here if you'll drop off for a minute. Very briefly, we need now to get into the history. The first, what did you want to know about the lap band, is what's the story? What's going on? Next slide. As briefly as possible, in one slide, a 30-year history of the lap band. We were preceded by an open adjustable gastric band by Dr. Kuzmak, innovated in the 80s. Laparoscopy exploded 1990-91, and the idea of doing things laparoscopically, including gastric banding, followed. R&D and clinical evaluation in animal labs, mostly porcine, extensively conducted in 1992 and 93, most of that in Europe and Belgium, and the first human implant with a lap band system was in September of 1993. So this has been around for a little while. Commercial launch in Europe and the rest of the world was spring of 94. We started a US clinical trial in 1995 and completed the trial and received FDA approval June 5th of 2001. Next slide, please. I'm curious what each of you are doing June 5th of 2001. I remember pretty clearly where I was. On that day, the FDA granted approval with conditions. It's very typical for a medical device. As a device, the lap band is totally unique. The FDA cannot regulate any other surgical procedures. They don't regulate sleeve, bypass, DS, BPD. The device, they have the oversight. As such, we have obligations as a company of how we provide the device. So this is something you probably will not have heard before now. Need to be clear that we have to maintain the original conditions of approval And those conditions included the surgeons interested and willing to do the lap band needed to have advanced laparoscopic skills and experience, specifically suturing and organ dissection. A few thousand choles with a clip applier and scissors doesn't quite cut it. Bariatric program for long-term patient management either already set up or being set up. They need to have completed a comprehensive training program provided by us. We're responsible for giving you all of the details for the handling, care and feeding, surgical implantation, and most important, the aftercare nuances, which we're going to talk about more today than anything. Final step is proctoring. To purchase the lap band, you have to have completed the workshop and then been signed off by an authorized proctor. And in this case today, these are typically from the programs you've been in with, if they have a lot of experience, you have to do a couple of cases and you're signed off. So this is a unique device-related FDA-required obligation. To this point, the faculty you're going to hear from today, every surgeon in the United States using bands, at one point over 2,000 surgeons completed this exact process, and it's still in effect today. This training is available, and this is entirely up to you. After this webinar or any other encounters we have, if you would like to move forward, we're here for you, and it's your choice if you have the wherewithal and the intention to do everything that is necessary to take care of lap band patients. Next slide. So who is Reshape Life Sciences and what's going on? Well, there's been a lot of companies on the lap band. 3 or 4 major transitions. The most recent was Reshape Life Sciences purchased the band from Apollo Endosurgery, December of 2018. Really taking from a quiet period of no support and no activity. You may never have heard of the lap band during your training. Never saw a lap band rep because it was not being promoted. Reshape is on the recovery. We're really a startup company bringing back a viable product that has years of experience, hundreds of publications, great reimbursement, clinical track record that's sound. We believe in it and we're here to support it. What's going to be the same? The lap band portfolio. The device is tested and true. There's a number of enhancements. The access port has been improved. There's a number of details that have subtleties that have made the procedure easier and the technique more straightforward. What's the difference in the future? Well, Reshape is dedicated to driving patient awareness. You may say, well, patients aren't asking for it. We know that. We're working on it, getting the media information reversed that the band is available, and at expert centers that provide the follow-up, you can have a good outcome. Really targeted advertising and using clinical evidence to drive patients to our practices that are dedicated to taking care of their patients. Next slide. So that's us in a nutshell. We're going to get on to the meat that you've signed up for today. Next slide, please. And Dr. Fielding, my pleasure to have Dr. Fielding with us again today. Did an excellent job on one of the first webinars we did a couple months ago on the Mythbusters, and his presentation today is a revamp, a brief version of that. Thanks for joining us today, George. It's all you.
Thanks, mate. Can you just, next slide? So welcome, everybody. It was 30 years ago that I was in the same place you guys are, and I know how exciting it is and also a bit nervy. I started doing lap band surgery in '96. I'd started doing laparoscopic surgery in Australia in 1990. I'm a little bit different because I've had it myself 20 years ago. I'd lost a lot of weight multiple times, regained it every time. Then in 1 year, I ended up on 11 different medications, and I had a band. I was doing them myself, and patients would come in and say, "But doctor, you're fatter than I am." And so I ended up eventually having it done, and it's the best thing I ever did. I've lost a lot of weight, over 100 pounds. I've come off most of the meds, and I sort of grew up with the band. I was a very early adopter of it, and I sort of helped work out a lot of the changes to do it technically. I've put in over 6,000 bands. I think it's important to get it in perspective. I work at NYU with a great bariatric team, and every week I do bands, sleeves and bypasses. I do duodenal switches. I do a lot of revisional surgery. I'm not just doing bands, but I definitely have them as a part of my armamentarium to offer patients. Next slide, please. So these are the 4 things we're going to talk about, because this is what's out there on the chat pages. It's out there at a lot of surgical meetings that, everyone's taking bands out, bands don't work, no one wants them, doesn't work, etc. Next slide. Next slide. So I think the biggest thing for you guys to get your head around is that not all bands are coming out. My friend Dr. Tseng is going to talk about band management, because that's the key to this. If you don't look after the bands and adjust them appropriately to control hunger and all that sort of stuff, they don't work. It's a lot of work to do that, and that's what Fred's going to talk about. But there are papers that show that this notion that all bands are being removed, it's just not so. Next slide. And there are lots and lots of studies like this that some of them are only short term, like 2 or 3 years. Some of them are 5 years. But it's the explant rate is sort of under 10%. And that's certainly our experience at NYU. Next slide, please. And this is another paper showing the same sort of thing. And this was the first one that really had longer follow-up. It was nearly 5 years. And at 5 years, it was 5%. So that 95% of the people are keeping their band. And I think one of the things, if you haven't learned it already in bariatric surgery, you will learn from personal experience that all our operations work and they can all fail. And the thing is, it's a chronic disease. And if the first one doesn't work, you sit down and talk to the patient and say, okay, what's next? Because if you don't have that approach and the first operation doesn't work in the long term, these patients will remain morbidly obese and die young. Next slide, please. Now, this is my old mate O'Brien. He's the guy that did my operation. I'm actually in that purple box. I'm one of his 20-year follow-up patients. And you can see that it's not a disaster. In fact, it's the opposite. Here's a bunch of people 20 years out who've lost weight, kept it off, haven't had their anatomy reordered or an organ removed, and most of them have kept their band. The progression that is in this slide shows the transition in the type of bands and also the techniques that we've evolved over the time to end up with what's in that purple box, which is a pretty successful outcome for an operation that takes half an hour and doesn't cut anything. Next slide, please. And I think it all boils down to band management. Fred Tseng is going to talk about this, but it is the key to this. If you put a band in and you don't adjust it, it won't work. And I tell patients it's a two-way street. You've got to turn up, I've got to listen to you, and I've got to adjust your band if it's the appropriate thing to do. It certainly became, the long-term management became easier when we worked out about putting it lower down on the stomach rather than higher up on the stomach, going through the lesser omentum or pars flaccida. It's one of the most beautiful planes in anatomy. You divide the pars flaccida, you find the base of the esophagus at the base of the right cruce, and you just pop a grasper through there. And it's a very gentle, beautiful dissection, and it sits the band right at the G junction, and you can adjust it and really control their hunger, which is the whole premise of this operation. Next slide, please. The next one is they don't work. Well, sometimes they don't, but you know what? Mostly they do. Next slide. Next slide. Here we go. So the thing is, out there in the community at the moment, the penetrance of bariatric surgery in America is 1% for eligible people. 1%. 99% of morbidly obese people are walking around, no surgery, and they get sick and they die young. This is a little bit distasteful, but it's what I say to patients, that ask yourself, how many old fat people do you see? The answer is very few, because they're all dead when they're younger. And so out there's a lot of people who are very scared about cutting an organ and rearranging their anatomy, even though all of us, you guys, your bosses, us, we all do that very safely, but it's still mentally a problem for patients. And one of the appeals of the band, which is when it really took off in the late 90s and early 2000s, was that we're not cutting anything. And if you don't like it, you can take it out. It takes me probably 15 minutes to take out a band. It's not like a great drama. It's a very safe operation. Even the irritating long-term complications with slips and port problems and all that sort of stuff, they're not life-threatening. And this appeals to people. And that's why at our practice at NYU, we're still doing them. All the 4 of us in that practice still do bands every week. And because we work hard at looking after them. Next slide, please. So this is 4 different papers looking at what actually happens long-term with bands. Does it work? Well, the weight loss works. We absolutely know the weight loss works if you adjust the band and the patient keeps coming for follow-up. I'm sure you all know this, but follow-up is the essence of why bariatric surgery works. It's just that sort of hand-holding, pat on the back, how you doing, mate? You're doing all right, taking your vitamins, all that sort of stuff. But it's in the band practice, it's essential. The thing won't work if you don't do that. And that's one of the things you need to wrap your head around, that you just have to do that for these people. They put their trust in you. If you adjust it, it'll work. And our practice in New York is reflected in these slides, none of which are ours. But they lose the weight, they keep it off, and a lot of their comorbidities get better. Next slide, please. And there's pros and cons of all this. I think the single biggest thing that's going on in New York, for example, at the moment, is that patients, there was the wave of the sleeve that absolutely mimicked the wave of the band. And what we're seeing in New York is a very substantial incidence of weight regain. And in the various communities in New York, the word's out in a way. Yeah, the sleeves like a miracle for the first year. It's pretty good in the second year, but man, that 3rd and 4th year, a lot of these people are regaining weight. I mean, no word of a lie, I see a fully weight regained back beyond where they started sleeve patient every day in my office. It's a very real thing. So there's an alternative to that, which is the band. And I think as a first option for a lot of patients, the band is a very safe, effective tool that works for the majority of them. And if it doesn't, you've got these other options to back up. Next slide, please. So I think this is one of the greatest studies in the bariatric literature. It's O'Brien's stuff from Melbourne. And this is every lap band paper has this curve. They do awesome. They get up around 50% excess weight loss, and they just stay there. And it's this very flat curve, which is different to the more dramatic curve of a bypass or a sleeve, where the initial weight loss is obviously and definitely higher, but the weight regain and the flattening of that curve is very substantial. And strangely enough, they end up, once you get out around 4 or 5 years, the curves are almost superimposable. Next slide, please. Next slide. I think, it's certainly gone off the boil. There's no doubt about it. But a lot of that is because of the social media. I think it's driven by social media, combined with, there was definitely a period of several years when the holding company that had the band dropped the ball. They truly did. And no one was sort of hearing about it anymore. And so many social media pages from practices with doing essentially just sleeves took control of the marketplace. And it was not so much that people thought the ban was terrible. It's that people just didn't know about it or weren't being told about it. And it just didn't get to sort of percolate anymore. Next slide. And as Vern mentioned, and you're going to hear about more of that, about this at the end, where the company's really trying to reverse that trend so that people do hear about it and it becomes, you know, a viable part of your armamentarium with sleeves, bypasses, DSs, balloons, whatever. It's part of the practice of bariatric surgery. Next slide. So this is the other thing. It's certainly, you know, you'd say, oh, there's no way it's as good as a bypass or a OAGB or DS or whatever. It's surprising how good it is, though. Next slide. You know, so much of bariatric surgery is aimed at treating comorbidities, and the worst of the comorbidities is diabetes, followed by, you know, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, sleep apnea and stuff. But diabetes is the crux of the problem. And a lot of the reversal of diabetes, as you all know, is related to weight loss. There are also, as you all know, the physiologic changes that come from not having food go through the duodenum and around the first part of the jejunum. Next slide. This is one of the funniest days of my life when I read this. This is Dr. Scott Bonaro, who created the biliary pancreatic diversion, which Dr. Hess then modified to make the DS. He's a giant, true giant of bariatric surgery, and he's a great guy. And then he put out this paper in 2009. He must have just about dropped his candy because he just couldn't believe it. He told me he couldn't believe it. That if you look at things 5 years out, they're just pretty much the same. It's not as fast, and that's the thing about the band. It's not as fast, but you get there in the end, and it's very similar. And there have been similar studies with bypasses, but this was the most powerful one because BPD is an extraordinarily fabulous weight loss operation, and it's an extraordinary operation for rapid reversal of diabetes. And the fact that the band sort of stuck in there when they looked at it at 5 years was pretty extraordinary. Next slide, please. And this is another paper, two different papers by Paul O'Brien and Jacques Himpens. They just show what I'm talking about, which is that it's a slower get there, but it gets there. And you can see on the bottom slide from Jacques' work that, you know, there is this weight regain issue that happens with sleeve and bypass. The majority of them still do fabulously, but they do get this leakage sort of back. And obviously, like some bands, they come right back to where they started. But the point is that everything, all this stuff is comparable. And it's a truly valid alternative in bariatric surgery. Next slide. So why do I do this? You know, everyone's telling me, oh, bands don't work, yada, yada. What are you doing, fielding and all that sort of stuff? Because the difference is I know they work. I've had one for 20 years. I've lost 120 pounds. I bloody love the thing. It changed my life. That's why I'm still alive at 63, because I'd have been dead. And with all the meds I had and all the comorbidities. And you know what? I haven't cut anything. I've still got everything where it's supposed to be. And that's the appeal of it. And that's why I do it. And that's why our partners and our friends around the country, trust me, there are plenty of people around this country doing bands in big centers, nowhere near what they were, but there are plenty still doing it for that reason, that you can help sick, fat people get well by just putting a band around the top of their stomach and then looking after them. Next slide. So here's a couple of photos. So she's 8 years out. She had a slip. She's lost the same amount of weight as me, 120 pounds. But here she is 8 years out. Next slide. Boom, as they say. You know, so, I mean, the transformation's fabulous, and she's 8 years out. Next. Here's another one. This guy's just your classic big guy. diabetes, hyperlipidemia, coronary artery disease, pulmonary fibrosis, sleep apnea, pulmonary hypertension. He's just waiting to die. Next slide. And here he is, enjoying life, fit, healthy. Next slide. Here's another one, similar sort of stuff. You know, she's lost over 100 pounds, healthy, feels great. Next. And she looks great. And you can just look in her eyes and you can see she feels great. Next slide, please. So thanks for your attention. And once again, congratulations on your achievements to be entering the real world and the best job in the world. So all the very best.
Thanks very much, George. Very, very nice presentation as always. Your personal story is remarkable. Your 20 years. You shared in the last webinar another family detail. You care to share that?
Yeah, my daughter's had my daughter, who's 37 now. She had a band last year, and she's doing great too. She was encouraged by what she saw her dad go through, you know, what happened to her dad, which is, and it's working for her.
So we would call that all in, and putting your knife where your mouth is. Thanks very much, George. Very much appreciate it. Moving on quickly to our next presenter. Next slide, please. Dr. Fred Tasinga would join us. Hi, Fred. How are you today?
Hey, Brendan. Thanks for having me.
Great. It's all you. Go for it.
Okay, so welcome everybody, and congratulations on being almost at the end of your education. I think it's a pretty awesome time in your life, and I think it's important to hear about the lap band and hear about how to make the lap band work and how it can fit into a busy general surgery, bariatric surgery practice. So for me, you know, I started out in 1996 as I went general surgeon, and I saw Paul O'Brien do lap bands, and he was talking about doing lap bands 6 a day in 2 different operating rooms. I was fascinated listening to him talk, and I'd been doing lap gastric bypasses for a while when I saw him and learned about the lap band. So in 2002, I started doing lap bands. I had Jaime Ponce come out, and he was my proctor, and he watched me do 3 lap bands. And 2,000 bands later, here I am. I can tell you that I do all the different types of operations. I do bands, bypasses, sleeves, loop duodenal switches. I put bands over sleeves. I put bands over bypasses. I do all kinds of things with bands. I've written some papers on bands over sleeves, kind of an interesting, edgy topic. And I have another surgeon that's with me now that joined me 2 years ago now, 3 NPs, a dietitian and a psychologist. Next slide. I think that one of the things I realized in doing bariatric surgery is that the aftercare is probably the most important thing. You know, the operation's for sure important, but if you don't follow your patients after the surgery, they're just not going to do as well as they would if you followed them. And I remember there was a slogan with sleeves, like sleeve them and leave them, but we learned that you really can't do that. And so with bands, initially we were told like 4 visits a year, and that would be enough. But we quickly realized, and there was a study on this and an advisory group that looked into it, and it really looked like it was better to see them every month, for sure, the first year. And next slide. And that's what we've actually ended up doing with all of our bariatric patients now. So if you come to me for a bariatric operation, no matter what you get, I tell my patients, I really want to live this out with you. I want to make sure you have the right support, the right nutrition, you know, the right vitamins, everything all the way through this process. So, you know, we're going to do it together. And I think that the patients like that. I don't think that patients don't want to feel like they're getting abandoned after these operations. And yet, next slide. And you have to remember, getting a band is unique because, you know, it's kind of like going to get braces put on your teeth. And if you don't show up to the orthodontist, and then a year later, you're wondering why your teeth are still crooked. Well, it's because you didn't come to get it, you know, your teeth adjusted, you know, your orthodontics adjusted. So that's kind of the way it is with the band. So what we saw with the band, I was doing bypasses, and I started doing bands in 2002. And I can remember my patients would say, at your support group, all there are bypasses, and I have a band, and I don't really relate to the patients that have a bypass. But after about 3 years, the patients were saying at the support group, all you have are bands. There's really nobody with a bypass anymore. So the bands just took off. Everybody wanted a band. And why wouldn't you want a band? There's no cutting, it's reversible, removable. It's like a much smaller decision to make. You can get a band, go home the same day. You can tell your friends that you were at a long dentist appointment or something and just go back to work a couple days later. So the band was a very exciting thing. Next slide. And I think what happened was a lot of people's practices really got inundated. If you're seeing patients as often as you'd like to see them, you're going to have thousands of visits going pretty soon, and you're going to be doing a lot of adjustments. And a lot of people didn't have the bandwidth, I think, to do that. And I think for me, I embraced it the other way. I really liked having all the patient encounters. It's a strange thing because as a surgeon, you think you're kind of, not touchy-feely. You don't want to talk to your patients that much. But with weight loss surgery, as you guys know, patients are excited. They're happy. You're changing their life. They're hugging you. They're telling you, how good they feel. It's makes you feel good to make somebody feel good. But then there's things that happen with the band too. There's flips, there's leaks, there's people that get a slip, and they're all things that need to be managed. Next slide. And so I think what we saw happening was, patients started, or doctors and patients, it was just a lot of work to keep it going. And again, I look at that as a great opportunity. If you have, and I think, no matter what surgeries you end up doing, you've got to see your patients, I think, once a month. It's an opportunity to get them, vitamins, to get, if they need to be on medical weight loss at all, you can offer that in your practice too. You want to be kind of comprehensive, I think, for your patients. And I think that over time, the lap band has kind of fallen out of favor. And I think that one of the reasons is people weren't willing to put that work in. Next slide. And I think that, band failure kind of became, the buzzword. And really, these were a lot of over-adjusted bands. People were coming in saying they couldn't, eat, or they weren't losing their weight right. But people, I think, weren't taking the time to try to manage the band. As soon as they hear something about the band, they just take it out. My new partner that joined me, that just finished a fellowship, told me that he said, yeah, I've had experience with bands. I've just taken a lot out during my fellowship. So he's putting bands in now that he kind of understands the band. Next slide. So there's a lot of things that can happen, but they don't happen very often. And I always tell my patients, they say, well, are there things that can go wrong with the band? I say, sure. I said, but the things that can go wrong with a band tend to be like, oh, nuts, something to fix. Not like, oh no, am I going to die? If you get a leak or something from a bypass or a sleeve or something like that. So the level of worry is just much less with a band. So if there's a port revision to do, it's a pretty simple procedure as an outpatient. They can go home. If they have a slip, you can fix it. And I think that they're all very doable things. Next slide. So there's some interesting studies. This is Dr. Wren, and she found that the more touches you have with the patient, the better their weight loss is. And I think that, as much as we don't want to think about it, I think that people need to really change their habits to have long-term weight loss. Some of my support groups, patients will raise their hand and say, I want the operation where I can do whatever I want and still lose all the weight. And I always say, well, we don't really have an operation like that. So we need to see our patients, we need to talk to them, we need to support them, and that's how we get them the best weight loss. Next slide. This one was interesting too, basically showing that the distance that people live from you, the further they live away from you, the worse their weight loss is going to be. So sometimes this really comes into play, and you have to get your patients committed to coming for their follow-up visits. Next slide. So there's also a positive relationship between how well patients go to the support group and how much weight they lose. So next slide. So all these things come into play, you know, going to the support group, coming to your follow-up visits, you know, taking your vitamins, getting your adjustments, you know, getting your touches with the healthcare system. Next slide. And I think that, you know, with this whole COVID thing happening now, we've all started to get the feel for seeing our patients over Zoom calls and things like that. And I think this is a perfect place to transition now into what Reshape has come up with that's going to really be able to make us track and follow our patients a lot better. But that's really the end of all I had to say, but I wanted to congratulate all of you and good luck to everyone.
Thanks very much, Fred. So very key summary there. You summarized a lot of things that need to happen. There was one item that was buried in there, and that was surgery. Everything else was management, aftercare, follow-up, adjustments. So there's a lot of back end, my takeaway from what you said. It's not just about the operation. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, you know, we had an interesting debate last year at our Illinois Association of Bariatric Surgeons conference, and we said, which is more important, the surgery or the aftercare? And I think that we pretty much agreed it's the aftercare, except one person made a very good point that without the surgery, you couldn't have the aftercare. So the surgery is important too.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you very much. And now on this topic of virtual is the new black. Next slide. Pleasure to introduce a colleague. Heather Mackey is joining us now. Heather is a registered dietitian with years of experience in bariatrics and in industry. She was in a practice for 6 years, managing lap band patients and bypass patients. And she then worked in industry and nutrition company for 6 or 7 years and has now been with us for this last year, helping us grow this very important area. We were working on something that became known as virtual care before it got popular this year, and we're launching it now. So my pleasure to have Heather give you an overview of this program for all of your bariatric patients. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Vern. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me today, and I look forward to hearing about your future journeys and what the future looks like for you and where you land. So as Vern mentioned, I am a registered dietitian with vast experience in the industry, both on the medical weight loss side and the surgical side, from a surgical practice setting to a supplement industry side, as well as co-author and co-developer of a medical weight loss program that's now used nationwide. Because of my vast experience, I have great knowledge of not only what patients need and want, but also what physicians and programs are looking for. And because of that, I'm excited to be a part of Reshape Life Sciences and launch Reshape Care. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we partnered with InHealth to bring Reshape Care to the bariatric market. And we know many barriers for patients to achieve long-term success, and one of those can be cost. One of the great things about Reshape Care is insurance may cover up to 26 visits per year, helping to reduce this cost barrier or burden. And even though Reshape Life Sciences is the parent company of Lapband, this is one of the first projects that you'll see coming from us as part of our overarching theme to become the company you want to partner with to help your patients lose weight and achieve wellness. And this is meant for all of your patients. So from medical weight loss to pre-op to post-op, and that's all procedures from balloon to lap band to SADI to DS, every single patient. Being a clinician at the core, evidence-based is extremely important to me, and so we'll briefly review some of that data. And then in today's climate, we're all looking for something that's convenient, whether the patient wants to do it from home or during a lunch break on their appointment, or take the appointment during their lunch break at work. And it needs to be customized. You know, every patient's needs are different and every program is different. And lastly, physicians are wanting to offer more and more to their patients, but how do they do this without breaking the bank or their patient's wallet? And that's one of the great things about Reshape Care, is not only is it free to the patient, but it's free to the program. Next slide. So one of the things that makes Reshape Care unique is the program's foundation. It's based off these 7 pillars of wellness. And during the initial assessment with the patient, the health coach does an assessment and basically evaluates based on stages of change and motivational interviewing what pillars the patient's ready to start working on. And as they go through their coaching sessions with the patient, they start interweaving each of these various pillars based on not only the physician's direction and care plan, but it also empowers the patient to help have some influence on that care plan as well. And this really drives that long-term lifestyle change. Next slide. So this is an extremely brief intro into the clinical data, and want to tease that upcoming webinar probably towards the end of August that you'll see going into greater detail about the importance of telemedicine and a little bit more about Reshape Care. So I hope to see you there. But patients can and do participate in virtual healthcare, and their outcomes can be as good, if not better. In this 12-week study, patients that participated in a video-based health coaching program lost 7.7% of total body weight loss. This rivals that of pharmacotherapy agents, compared to a group that only lost 3.4% in standard office visits. The interesting part for me was really that these patients received no intervention after that 12-week mark, and at 1 year they were followed up, and the 7.7% group maintained that loss at 6.9%. To me, that suggests a true lifestyle change. It's not just another diet. And this study was the program that Reshape Care was based on. So how do we offer this virtual care safely? Because that tends to be a huge concern to practitioners, to patients, everyone. Reshape Care encourages escalation protocols that are established and executed by the physician so that the coaches know when and how you want that handled. Your medical algorithms are followed and your clinical protocols are supported. The health coaches have also received extensive training on current ASMBS guidelines. We've also worked with my colleague and friend Vern Vincent, the Latvian expert, and Pam Davis from Bariatric University, a well-known certified bariatric nurse, to ensure that these health coaches are up to date on all of their bariatric knowledge. Next slide. As we know, obesity is unfortunately a chronic metabolic disease, and Reshape Care helps to address this treatment continuum by being able to offer care not only for true medical weight loss, but also preoperatively, postoperatively, and can also address weight regain with our patients should that occur as well. We really see Reshape Care as an opportunity to offer quality improvement projects that might even be able to be a part of the ASMBS metabolic and bariatric surgery accreditation and quality improvement program, but more to come on that. Next slide. So with that, I thank Fred for the great education and George as well, and I know there's more to come. Vern, thank you for the introduction, and I look forward to hearing questions about virtual healthcare. And lastly, next slide, please. I couldn't have done this without the whole team here at Reshape Life Sciences, but just a quick call out to my close colleagues here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heather. Now let me ask you a question before we run out of time here. Did I understand you to say that this is free to the practice and free to the patient, and it's billable to insurance? Did you say those things?
Correct. Correct. And we left out the part where it's a revenue driver as well to the practice.
Okay.
So yeah, and it really is an opportunity to be able to offer that long-term aftercare solution that so many practices need and expand the bandwidth, because like, you know, we mentioned, you get all these patients, it's great, but how do you take care of them for life?
And for all patients, any type of procedure.
Exactly.
Pre-op medical weight loss as well. Okay. More to come. We'll have a webinar on this topic in the next month with a lot more detail. Thanks very much, Heather.
Thank
now we'll
you.
move on to the next slide and our last presenter today, Dr. John Olsafka from Louisville, Kentucky. John, good afternoon. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Vern, and thanks, Reshape. And I really appreciate the opportunity to go last, because everyone knows that the most important talk is the last talk. Congratulations, fellows. What a tough time. You're going out, going to start a new practice. Things are unsure, and it's a pandemic. So I think this is a really, really interesting time, and good luck to you. So moving right along, what I'm going to discuss is kind of the business of the band and why do you incorporate it and how. So we'll look at integrating lap band into your practice, even if you're not trained yet to put bands in. review billing, because that's what becomes important when you're in the real world, and provide insight how to incorporate those patients, and then look at some marketing strategies. Next slide. So quickly, I've been in private practice for 21 years. I started with general surgery, was enjoying laparoscopy, and someone came up to me and said, why don't you look into bariatrics? And I said, why do I want to operate on obese people all the time? And I realized that I was doing it already. So I hired my partner, Dr. Vince Lusko, who had put the first band in Kentucky in his residency. And we decided to start a lap band program in 2003. And we've been going strong ever since. 4,500 new cases. We do about 4 to 6 per week. And during the high season near Christmas, when the deductibles are in, we can do about 8 to 10 before noon. We've participated in national and international studies. Next slide. So the characteristics of the band, you've already seen this. Safety profile, it is the safest procedure. And if you're starting a practice, you don't really want to go in and do the most complex revisional surgery or complex procedures are out there. You want to establish a reputation. You want to establish patients. It's outpatient. How much more important can that be when you look at our current environment? We were shut down for 2 months doing inpatient surgery. There was no bariatrics. There was no elective surgery, but we can continue to do bands as an outpatient and see our bands. It's relatively easy to place. It's adjustable. And adjustable is more important than you think. If someone comes in and they're having trouble with a sleeve or a bypass, the options are limited. But here you can let a little fluid out, take a step back, and reintegrate them into a program. There's reproducible results. There's pretty much a standard follow-up program as you're seeing. It's reimbursed, FDA approved, and it's still endorsed by the ASMBS. Next slide. So how do you bring in a lap band into your office? Well, and why would you do that in a new practice? Well, you want to generate office traffic. And a lot of times there's a local niche that's available where there's a void in lap band care. I know some major cities that are 1 million people strong that really don't have a strong lap band program available. But you have these lap band program or lap band patients out there that are looking for a physician. If you build it, they will come, and you will start this flow of patients into your office. Word of mouth to build practice. Interacting with your patients in an aftercare program is essential. They tell their friends, and their friends tell their friends, and the practice just skyrockets. You generate rapid digital medium. These patients have their own websites, their own Facebook sites, their closed Facebook sites with lap band and lap band divas and you name it, and they talk. If they have a good experience, if they find a good doctor, word gets out. And you're able to harvest ancillary bariatrics and general surgery. I don't know if you're going to be out doing general surgery also, but most of you will. And you'll see their family members, you'll see their friends, you'll do their gallbladders. It all starts to grow. And there's limited liability. There is not a litigious atmosphere against lap bands out there by any means. Certainly not how it was back in the lap bypass days when Oprah was on. And you can also bill for these patients. I understand that you're coming out, you're going to have to pay some bills. The WRVU is very important. That is a standardized way of giving a value to what you do. And most people now are employed and paid by the RVU. And so that's important to recognize that when you're seeing these patients and doing other things. So a new patient, you're going to bill a WRVU of about 3.17, and that's significant. Next slide. So the routine patient, let's say the patient that's doing fairly well that needs a doctor, and you're going to see them in the office. There's 2 myths out there. I don't have time, and basically it's just charity work. I'm not getting paid for it. Why would I want to see a lap band patient? Well, first of all, you can be very, very efficient with your lap band visit. You have the patient with the information readily available. Patient weighs themselves once a week. They bring that weight card in. We put it on a spreadsheet. We give them a behavior questionnaire. I have that information before I walk into the office. I pretty much know what's going on. We discuss a treatment plan and we discuss expectations. Expectations are everything. Some of these patients had bands in the past and they thought they would lose all their weight with one adjustment and didn't have to come back. We have to change that. If we need to do an adjustment, I walk out of the room, tell my nurse, they set it up, we do it right there at the bedside. But it's a surgeon-centered program. We see our patients, we manage our patients, we take care of them. When I see a patient, I can bill him a level 4. That's a 1.4 RVU, but you can also bill a procedural code if you do an adjustment of 2.0. That's a 15-minute conversation that's 2.5 work RVUs. And finally, the COVID factor. We already talked about outpatient, but now we're able to generate office traffic and still see patients, whether it be telemarketing or in our office. And if we do go back to a shutdown again, you still have the opportunity to do outpatients and see those patients and build patients from your office. Next slide. And this is just an example of what I see when I go in a room. That graph to the left is someone's weight plotted against time each week. And those arrows show when they came in and when I did an adjustment. And that is one of the perfect band graphs that you can see. They're losing about 1 to 2 pounds a week. I see that they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. I know when to do their adjustments. That's a very happy patient. The sheet to the right is going to be just a little checkbox sheet that gives me the information. Are they kind of following the rules? Are they following the program? With those 2 sheets, before I walk in the room, I pretty much already have a plan. It can be a very efficient visit. Next slide. Well, what about patients having issues? The myth, as we've already discussed, is if you're having trouble with the band, we need to take it out or do something different. And reality is that most of the complications with lap band are so simple to take care of, and they're worth it. Dysphagia or GERD. People with lap band don't have reflux. If they have reflux, it's almost always the band's too tight. They're having reflux at night from food sitting in their esophagus when they lie down. You take a little fluid out. They don't need an upper GI. They don't need a scope. They don't need to see their gastroenterologist. You take a little fluid out. The system's not holding fluid. It's usually the port. You change the port. If they're only taking in liquid foods and not losing weight, they're in the red zone. Their band is too tight. Take some fluid out. It's very simple to fix the most common problems. Next slide. What about the orphan band? These are bands out there that you're going to find in your community that have been floating around without a doctor, don't know what to do, can't find anyone to take care of them, and you open the door. Well, if you're going to take care of a band and they haven't been seen for a long time, we tend to try to get the records if we can. That's difficult, but sometimes you can't, don't necessarily need them, but we try. We often get a buried swallow. If they haven't been seen in 3 or 4 years, we want to see what our starting point is. And then we have a consultation discussion, expectations, and then we'll often access the port right there and perform a dynamic adjustment and see where they're at. We get them involved in our nutritionist, and we establish a schedule and integrate them into our program. Next slide. So is it worth your time to learn the procedure? Well, first of all, learning the procedure takes about 1 to 2 days, as Vern said. You basically can learn the band very, very quickly, at least the technique, but you do have to be trained. But if you look at the RVUs with certain band procedures, placement, 18, a gastric revision for a slip, 20. If you replace a band, if someone has a band's too tight, you replace it with another band, 20. If you compare that with the sleeve gastrectomy, it's highly comparable, and all of those procedures take less than an hour. Most of them take 20 to 30 minutes. And in our practice, our partner and I assist each other each time. That's another add-on of about 13 to 14%. Next slide. So is it worth your time to learn? Once again, well, there's a short learning curve and training, and certainly the aftercare is pretty well standardized. There's no surgical equipment or investment needed. You already have it. There's minimal pre-op workup for these patients. We work them up like a gallbladder, basically. There's not a big cardiac workup. A lot of times there's not anything medical that needs to be done. There's established training techniques available. You're going to know how to do aftercare. You're going to know how to place bands. All of this has been worked out over the last 20 years. And there's an availability of resources out there with difficult cases. You can contact Reshape, and they'll get you in touch with a surgeon that's doing a large volume of bands, and we are happy to take on an x-ray and take a look. Or if there's someone that has a difficult slip, we take care of those patients in our program and then send them back to the lap band surgeons in the community or in the area to maintain them and do the aftercare. And it works out really good, and it's in the best interest of the patient. It is hard to teach experience, and you want to have the best outcome you can, especially in difficult cases. Next slide, please. And so, but you have to look before you leave. This is an all-in type scenario. You can't just dabble on the side and say, I'll see a couple lap bands or I'll do a few of them. It's really something you have to make a commitment to. But once you do, I can tell you, it becomes really, really fun and a good part of your practice. People come to me because they want bands. The band revival is already out there. But BMI of 30 or 35 is not looking for a sleeve or a bypass, but they will come in there saying, I want a band, period. And you'll have that opportunity to provide that. But you do have to see the patient quite frequently. You don't necessarily have to see them 12 plus times a year. Your nutritionist can see them, but I think it's very important that you as a surgeon establish that relationship for a variety of reasons. One, for you to understand the lap band patient and the aftercare, and number two, to establish that relationship. As Dr. Fielding said, they need your hand holding. This is a long-term disease and there is not a cure. And people with the lap band, I tell them they may have relapses. They may go back out, so to speak, and you can bring them back into the fold and take a step back and reintroduce them into the program. You have to be available, however, to manage the patient that's too tight, whether it be by you or by spontaneous. People call us up and they say, I'm too tight, I can't keep fluids down. Come by my office tomorrow, I'll take a little fluid out. It's not an emergency, but you have to make yourself available. If you're setting up a comprehensive band program, Reshape already has the resources for you to do that. Next slide. And the good news is that insurance covers lap band, period. Most insurance companies will cover it. Our best coverage here in Kentucky is Medicare and Medicaid. Next slide. And the last slide is basically marketing the band. What works? Well, we've done everything. We really kind of went at a shotgun approach about 4 or 5 years ago. We had billboards, radio ads, we were on TV intermittently. I went to this marketing conference and they said, if you can establish your name in a certain field, ain't no one catching up with you. And so we were going to be the lap band gurus around Louisville. And there was 4 or 5 lap band places or lap band surgeons putting in bands. It was a very band friendly area. But what we found out is what works. And digital marketing is the best bang for your buck. You get on Facebook, you get on Google, these people forward it, it goes viral. Patient interactions are key. Our #1 way to recruit patients is patient-to-patient referrals. They bring their family, they bring their friends, it grows. And the last is the Reshape website. You put your name on there, you're a dedicated lap band surgeon, someone calls up and they're interested, they're gonna find you. Next slide. So the last thing I'll say is thank you very much. Remember that the lap band is a tool, just like the bypass and the sleeve, and it's basically how they interact with this tool that determines their results. Thank you.
John, very nicely done in the tight time allotted. Appreciate it. A couple of things you said a couple of times. You said the word tight. And if anybody has been to one of my programs or meets me along the way, you will quote me many times, the simplicity of remembering this. Too tight is not right. Almost all bad things we hear about bands, oh, they have reflux all the time. They can't sleep lying down, vomiting at meals. They're too tight. GERD means they've got a big pouch or they're too tight. These aren't secrets. These are kind of the basics.
We tell our patients for reflux at night, band too tight. Call your surgeon.
There you go. Also, you mentioned word of mouth and being the most positive, strong way you get patients. Backing up to the beginning of why you would take a lap band patient, a lost lap band patient, there's literally thousands, hundreds of thousands around the world out of follow-up. Either their surgeons have stopped or they've moved and they don't even know. We get a call from customers, patients saying, I've had a band 10 years. Can I still have an adjustment? Yes. We go to the surgeon locator. We can point them to somebody to take care of them. And all of you watching, the audience, the surgeon locator is a great resource for you. Go to lapband.com and find the surgeon locator, put in the zip code. So if you have a patient that's in trouble somewhere, one of the many reasons that I hear from the lap band group in the United States, the most common is NYU. They've got patients everywhere. George Fielding, Chris Wren, they'll text or email me, I've got a patient just moved to Dubai. Somebody there? Yes, we'll get the connection. Or Biloxi, or wherever it is, we want to help those people get covered. So let's move on to the next slide and have the rest of the faculty come back on here. George and Fred and Heather, if you would come back with us. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Any final comments that any of you would like to make before we open it to some questions? Nothing. Okay, it's been a tight presentation, getting it done exactly in the hour allotted, which is always a miracle to me. Thinking back to when you stepped out of the door the last day of your training, Fred, from that day till now, has it all turned out exactly like you expected it?
No, it's turned out better, I think. It's been great. It's been a really fun ride so far. And I think that bariatric surgery has been the thing that made it so fun. Like I said, I think that having patients that are so happy that you really feel like you're changing somebody's life is so much better than taking an appendix out or something like that. But I don't need to convince any of you of that. You've already picked that as your life's calling.
Yeah. You will remember, of course, as I've said, there's 3 simple requirements to be successful in bariatric surgery. You have to want to do it. Can't be somebody said, hey, the guy who did it left, take over. You have to like doing it. These patients are user not friendly. They're busy. You're going to talk to them and see them all the time. You have to like that. And the third is you got to know what the hell you're doing. And hopefully that's where we can help. We can bring the education and the network and to the audience today. Wherever you are landing, there's somebody nearby who's doing lap bands. There's somebody who you could collaborate with. Or if you have come across a lap band patient that's in trouble, you don't have to take care of them. Make a choice and contact us. Find the surgeon on the locator. Refer the patient to somebody who has taken care of thousands. Or work with them to learn how to take care of that patient. Because as John said, that patient, whether you can help them fix them up or not, you care about them and try. They have a brother, sister, cousin, mother beautician that's paying attention that just might follow them in to your new growing practice. And I think with that, we're over our allotted time. And I'd like to once again say thank you very much to a seriously rock star faculty. And Heather, you did a very nice job with our Reshape Care. Very exciting program for all patients. And with that, we'd all say congratulations one last time. Enjoy packing up and moving on. Have a good day. Thanks very much.